And welcome back again. Yours truly, Anthony Parker Alexander. We keep it simple, we keep it real, and we keep it honest. The first timer here, or you've seen the show a couple of times, you know we try to do stories with a Parker twist, whether it's a well known story or a story that people just don't know about. If you have any questions or comments, you can email yours truly. It's parkerman2011 at gmail.com, parkerman2011 at gmail.com. You can text me, leave a voicemail. Telephone number is 216 702 3718, 216 702 3718. And everybody's talking about this Fannie Willis Donald Trump case. It's going crazy now. And we're kind of forgetting the reason for this case. And it was pretty much, let's see, about charging Donald Trump and 14 other people for charges as far as trying to get votes out there to help him win in Georgia. That was the initial case. Now it's pretty much saying, excuse me, that Fannie Willis and Nathan Bradley had an affair or relationship while they're doing this case, and some saying it's a conflict of interest. So we're talking about that now. And as we're talking about this, one of the people that we're kind of talking about, we talk about Terrence Bradley, the guy that seems to be giving up everything. But what about Ashleigh Merchant? She recently was in front of a Senate hearing, and you wonder, okay, what's the purpose of the Senate hearing? Well, they're there pretty much to ask more questions. Okay. And so she recently had her hearing session, and it was about 3 hours. And how did you view that if you did view that? Did you look at it as, okay, she spilled the beans too? Did you look at it as, wow, this lady is really ingrained, or maybe she's not that good? Because throughout the case, um, when she was in front of the judge, she seemed a little flustered. Excuse me. But when she was doing the Senate hearing, it looks like she did pretty good. So throughout the show, we're going to talk about the indictment, why they're trying to indict Fannie, Senator Jones going toe to toe with Miss Merchant. We're going to talk about the trips. We're going to talk about the cell phone process, Cell Hawk and Cell Bright, the love nest, as one of the people in the hearing said. We're going to talk about that. And we're also going to give a little background on Ashleigh Merchant. So, who is she? So, she's the attorney for Michael Rowan, or Roman. He's one of the 19 co-defendants originally indicted in the Donald Trump case. So, his background, because he's the one that said, you know what, let me give some information to see if these attorneys are doing the right thing. So he's a Philadelphia GOP operative. Don't know what that means. Operative sounds kind of secretive. Who is director of election day operations for Trump's 2020 reelection campaign. So he faces 7 charges, including multiple conspiracy charges. The charges stem from several events, including his alleged role in the Trump alternate elector scheme. So he's been one of the lesser known people in this case, but he brought the motion to national attention not too long ago to disqualify Willis, alleging the relationship between Willis and Special Prosecutor Nathan Wade was ultimately acknowledged by both in a series of extraordinary hearings. That's interesting on the motion. So how did he find out about that, this Roman guy? So our question now is the disqualification saga. When the relationship began, did this relationship between Wade and Willis begin before she took the case? Or did it begin after she took the case? And if there was some money tied into this, as you know, Miss Willis and Mr. Wade, they have no receipts for anything. Some people are saying that is there double dipping involved? So let's say they become boyfriend and girlfriend after Trump. That may not be as bad in some people's eyes, but then some people say if they became boyfriend and girlfriend before the case, and she says, wow, Nathan, I got this opportunity. I want to give you a chance to be my partner. I'm going to pay you this much. And if I give you this, all I want is something else in return. I'll help make you rich. You help make me rich. They're saying that that's a form of racketeering. It's interesting. So we're going to go over this case with, Ashleigh. And we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about Ashleigh. So you're watching, again, keeping it honest with yours truly, Anthony Parker, Alexander, and we're going to be talking about the Senate hearing and how did Ashleigh do. But rest assured, when Senator Jones comes in, they're going to be going toe to toe, and we're going to give our commentary throughout it. So stay tuned for that. Hopefully, you pick up something out of this, which I have too. So periodically, we're going to talk while this is going on. We'll stop it and talk, but you'll get a chance to hear what Ashleigh did, and did Ashleigh kind of throw Terrence Bradley under the bus. But here's the story.
Yes. Yeah. But Mr. Bradley told me at that first meeting that they would meet at hotels. He told me about a lot of travel. I mean, he detailed, he detailed a lot of stuff. He said that they traveled to Texas, they traveled to Florida, just, a lot of different travel. He said Belize. He specifically said Belize, a cruise, the Bahamas, things like that.
And you were later able to verify that through other subpoenas or open records request or whatever?
Yes, I was. I was able to, I subpoenaed bank records, I subpoenaed credit card records, and then I actually subpoenaed the travel agencies that Mr. Wade used for some of those trips. He used 2 of the cruises that they took, he used a travel agency. So there was a cruise to the Bahamas I got through a travel agency. There was a trip to Aruba that I got through the travel agency. And then there was another cruise, I think that one's to the Bahamas also, that I got through a different travel agency. And then his credit cards are the ones that showed all the Belize trips.
And they showed that he was buying the tickets for both himself and Miss Willis.
Oh, yes. The credit card statements. So because I guess he used a travel agency, his credit card statements actually had her name and seat number and all that on it.
Okay.
So, there was no disputing.
Clear it was paid for by him on his credit cards?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Is this the document you gave us from the Capital One there?
It is. Yes. And there you can see. So Clara Bowman is Mr. Wade's mom. So this was the cruise that happened October 31st, around that date. Mr. Wade paid for Miss Willis, Mr. Wade, and then his mother's plane tickets, and then also their cruise receipt. I think that one was Royal Caribbean.
And so with this is one of the documents that they say that Nathan used. And so I guess he was truthful on that when he said, he took his mom and Fanny. But the question is, and is it really a question? Does it matter where he got this money from to go on the trip?
Okay. So your summary here showing the trips, we know that
we're going to speed it up a little bit because
cases, the Cellhawk data that you just showed, that is geolocation data. That is different from the Cellbrite.
So what she's talking about is the Cellhawk and the Cellbrite, how they got the locations. That's interesting. So you think about this. So these 2 companies, Cellhawk and Cellbrite, and they use this in court cases. I'm not an attorney, okay? But whenever they want to find out where people have gone, they use a Cellhawk and they use a Cellbrite to back up maybe their false claims of as if they hadn't been there, which Wade and also Fanny has said they weren't at certain places. So the courts uses Cellhawk and Cellbrite to find out exactly where they were.
So there's 2 different programs. Cellhawk is the program that does geolocation data. Essentially what you do is you get all of the pings. So every time your phone, you see those cell phone towers everywhere. Every time you use your phone, it's trying to find the closest tower. So in a metro area like this, there's a lot of towers. That's why we get good signals. So when he's in Hapeville, there's a lot of towers. So we can really, really narrow it down. So what we had our investigator do, and I'm only talking about the geolocation stuff. I'll talk about the text in a minute. But what we had our investigator do was narrow it down. We got all the raw data and we had him narrow down, and we actually excluded a ton of things that were not right on top of this location. Like we wanted to be very, very careful just to have what was literally right on top of this location. So he created a geolocation fence, which
The location you're talking about is Miss Yeardy's condo.
yes,
Okay.
it is Miss Yurdy's condo.
And Miss Yuri was also a former employee of Miss Willis and also one of her friends. And from what we found out later on, that Fanny and Nathan would also go over to her house. And she was the one that said Fanny and Nathan had a relationship in 2019.
That area. So he was able to find, essentially, just to summarize a couple of the things, where he, Mr. Wade would call Miss Willis at midnight, something like that. And then all of a sudden his phone would travel, and you can actually watch it. When you do the live Cellhawk, the app, it's pretty cool. You can actually watch the phone travel, and it's pinging because you're using it. If you have an app open, your phone's pinging. So my phone's pinging right now because I'm sure I have an app open. So it's pinging from his house all the way down to the condo at midnight, 1 a.m. And he calls her when he gets there. And then it goes silent for 4 or 5 hours. And then, early in the morning hours, he starts pinging again, driving back, and then he texts her when he gets home.
So she's pretty much saying that they had technology to let you know that Mr. Wade was over Fanny's house overnight. And then he contacted her when he got home.
So,
and this is before he gets hired in November of 21.
Yes.
Okay.
So, and there's a couple different ones, and I would defer to the experts on the Cellhawk data, but that's the summaries based on what we had him do. And again, we tried to be very, very narrow. There were a lot of dates that it looked like it happened also, but maybe he was bouncing off a different location. And so we wanted to be very narrow.
So is that why y'all asked him in the hearing, how many times had you been to this you already kind of had the date on him?
Well, so that's an interesting point. All we have as defense lawyers is the right to subpoena evidence. I have to have an evidentiary hearing to do that. I could not issue a subpoena for AT&T for this evidence until I had a hearing date. So, and it takes a while to get this stuff. We got it that morning. So, the morning of the hearing, and obviously I'm kind of busy doing the hearing. We got that data. My paralegal was literally trying to download it for the investigator at the time and get it over. We knew we had the data, but we didn't know what it showed.
So at the day of the court, they had the information already. And like she said, usually it takes a long time, but it took 1 day. So they got the data the day of the court. So, and I don't know, so we'd have to go back to that. When they're asking Fanny and Nathan questions, well, were you there? How many times did you guys get together? And like, oh, we got together maybe 4 times, but the data shows 12. It means they're lying.
So at that time, we didn't know, what it showed really until he was able to do the analysis. We had some preliminary reports from him, but nothing. I mean, it took a lot of hours. It's a lot of data. So it takes a lot of time to pinpoint this information. Yeah. But the other thing that I was talking about, so this is the Cellhawk report, and heat map is just like how many times it's pinging, heavy concentration is, you're talking a lot at this time, or you're at that location a lot. There's a lot of usage. The other thing I was talking about, just to make sure it's clear, so that's Cellhawk. Cellbrite is a different program. Cellbrite, and it's CELLEBRITE. Cellbrite is a program similar to Cellhawk, but it downloads data in the phone. So like this one is you pinging off of towers. It's geolocation.
Showing where you were.
Exactly.
At a certain time.
Cellbrite actually can get your texts, your pictures, your app usage. I mean, all of that stuff.
So man, you look at that, Cellbrite can get anything and everything you have on this phone. So even if you delete it, Cellbrite, which I guess is used with authorities, can pick up everything off your phone. Wow. I don't know if that's good or bad to tell people.
So it's one of those things that if you want, if a defendant is threatening someone by text and they delete it, they'll take their phone and hook it up to Cellbrite. Cellbrite it makes what's called a forensic copy of the phone, but you can also limit the data. So it's very expensive program. So not a lot of people have it. So when I have my clients use it, costs a lot of money for them to have it done, but the DA's office has it. They have the software, they pay for it. You can find that in their open checkbook. The city of Atlanta police have it as well. But what you can do is you can copy cell phone. So, what I had mentioned earlier is
You have to have the cell phone to do that?
You do. You have to have the
So
cell phone.
what
to
did
do it.
Mr. Bradley give you all his cell phone? Or
No.
how'd you get Mr. Wade's cell phone?
So we did not get that data from Mr. Wade. So we only got the geolocation data from Mr. Wade. I do not have the power to get the text messages. I don't have that power. I would have to have a search warrant. The state's the only one that has the power to actually get someone's text messages out of their phone.
So did Mr. Wade give the courts his phone, and then they took it from there?
But my whole point in saying that was if I had been accused of having an affair and it didn't start, and I said it started in April and someone else said it started in November, they have the ability. I don't have the ability. They have the ability to plug that phone into the Cellbrite and print out a report
Right.
that shows all of the texts.
So Mr. Wade and Ms. Willis, had they wanted to disprove your allegations, could have just used that Cellbrite program and it would have shown no communications between them.
Yes.
So then that's interesting. So instead of the courts using the Cellbrite, excuse me, if Fanny and Nathan wanted to show their innocence and that they weren't anywhere around each other, they could have used that themselves. Now, it's interesting because with courts, and from what I saw and heard, RICO cases sometimes, they use this phone data to let people know where they were at, if they were in that area or not. So supposedly, Fanny and Nate should have known this, but if they're being investigated, maybe they didn't think about that because they use it to investigate other people.
And it would have also showed the contents of the text. If the texts are romantic, if they're not romantic, if they're friendly, and they would control the data. So if there's something that was privileged, they could redact it. If there was something that, if they wanted to only limit it to we want to prove that we weren't talking romantically in November, they could limit it. So they
could have actually pulled up the text itself to say, hey, I need you to help me work on this case, or else, hey, I need you to meet me at the Love Nest.
Yes, 100%. Yes.
So meeting you at the Love Nest, which we talked about. So technically they could have used this, got the program themselves and deleted everything and then gave it to the court as proof. And it'd be up to the courts to say, well, you know what? We want to use our own.
I don't have that ability. So I don't have the ability to get a search warrant and get that data. All I have the ability to do is get that geofencing.
Well, who found out about these 12,000 texts and calls and all that kind of stuff?
That is what I was able to get by subpoena. So I was able to get the geolocation data by subpoena. What I can't get is what's inside of the phone. I can't get the texts inside the phone.
The word.
So it's interesting. She can get the location of where they were at with the phone, but she couldn't get the texts inside the phone and pictures.
It's in the text.
Exactly.
But you were able to find out that they were texting each other
yeah.
prior to November 1st of 21.
Yes.
How did you find that data? Is that anything you've produced to us?
That is the CellHawk data actually analyzes that. So you can see, we just summarized 2021. So approximately 12,000 interactions, that's voice and texts for the year of 2021. And again,
12,000 conversations for 2021 between Nathan and Fanny. Wow.
Remember 2021, he didn't get the contract until November of that
Right.
year. So most of 2021, he's not under contract. Over 2,000 voice calls, almost 10,000 text messages.
How did they?
2,000 voice calls and almost 10,000 text messages. Wow. So if they weren't working together, like he says, how do you explain that?
Explain that. Did you confront? We're not privy to what all came out
Right.
in evidence at the hearings that you've had. Did you get either one of them to say, that's not true, we didn't really talk 12,000 times? Or
No, what they did was they filed an affidavit saying that geolocation data is not always reliable.
So they're saying it's not always reliable, but they do use these in court cases.
okay, does that apply to Cellbrite data though?
No, it doesn't. And it was ironic because I have a number of cases. I mean, almost every murder case I've had in the last decade has had geolocation data.
Used by the prosecution against the defendant, right?
They use CellHawk data. I mean, literally, they're using this right now. So our investigator actually analyzed the same. There's a trial going on. It's called the YSL trial. There's this same data being used in that trial, and our investigator actually analyzed it for them in that case. So
So that's interesting. So in Fannie's office, they do use that, and the person that is using it on another case is using it on this case, but yet Fannie is saying it's unreliable.
Oh, I mean,
For them, you mean for the Fulton County DA's office?
no, for the defense looking at
defense.
that data. So the point is they're currently using the same data in another courtroom to prosecute someone, but their defense in our case was that it's not reliable.
Okay. Got it. And did your Cellbrite data come in? The existence of the cell phone calls?
No, so the Cellbrite data, that would have to be voluntary on part of the DA to actually
So they could show you that to disprove your allegations?
100%.
Okay, didn't
Yes.
do it?
No.
Neither Wade nor Willis?
No.
Okay. All right, so you've done.
So that was the nuts and bolts of putting together the cell phone records. Let me know what you think of that. So Fannie and Nate, with this little bit right now, do you think they're hiding something? Boy, I mean, you can tell that Natalie, she puts in a lot of work. Speaking of work, you're watching. Yours truly, keeping it honest, with Anthony Parker Alexander. And if you have any questions or comments, you can email yours truly at parkerman2011@gmail.com, parkerman2011@gmail.com. Give me a call, leave a message, 216-702-3718, 216-702-3718. Let me know what you think of this so far. We're trying to put a little spin on this. We're trying to take our time to do this, and also to see how Ms. Merchant is doing. Again, we're going to talk about Fannie getting indicted, the love nest, as they call it. Okay, I like that. And Senator Jones, yes. So let's get back to this. And the next subject, they've done the investigation as far as the cell phones and location. What now?
Done your investigation, you've determined you think there was a relationship that had begun before he was hired.
Yes.
And after having met with Mr. Bradley, you began to prepare a motion to disqualify and to dismiss the case altogether, right?
Yes. I actually started the motion
Let me
in
get back on
September.
the cell phone.
and then added to
text
it.
messages. All right, and
So listen to this backstory with Mr. Bradley, Terrence Bradley. It's interesting because this guy got up on the stand, and the first day he just kind of talked a little bit, spilled a little bit of beans. The second day he clammed up. A lot of people wondering why, but he was very comfortable talking to Ashleigh.
so then you somehow preserved, you had text communications with Mr. Bradley to confirm this?
Yes.
And was that because you didn't want to file a pleading that was inaccurate?
100%.
You wanted him to verify the accuracy of what you were claiming had happened?
I did not want to say one word that had not been verified.
Because he was the source.
Yes.
He's the guy that was his law partner and his divorce attorney,
Yes.
who probably knew as well as anybody in the state.
They had been best friends also.
Okay. All right. And so let's pull these up, Senator Dolezal. When did you start? You kept these text messages somehow?
I did. So I actually, Mr. Bradley uses a Android, I believe. And so it was not easy to just download them. And I'm not the most tech savvy person. There's a lot of texts that just went into things that I thought would just embarrass people and weren't relevant. So what I did was I screenshotted the texts that I thought were relevant. I tried to use those in court, but the prosecutor kept objecting and saying I was hiding things because I wasn't showing all of my text. So they just kept on and on for days saying I was hiding things. And I explained to them, I let them look through my phone. They scrolled through all my texts.
Who's they?
It was Adam Abadi was the prosecutor.
Okay.
So he just kept saying, that where's the beginning of that text? Where's the thing after that? Where's the other part of that text? These aren't complete, rule of completeness, kept objecting. And I had just screenshotted the texts that I thought were highly relevant, but weren't slanderous, I guess. I don't even know the word, but there were some that like,
Something-
that Miss Willis's daughter had failed out, like things like that. They were just ugly. They didn't need to be admitted.
Oh, yeah, I read that. We
I
don't
had
need to
just,
go there.
so I had tried really hard to just screenshot the relevant ones, but they kept saying that I was hiding stuff and I wasn't showing the whole thing. So when they objected to my text coming in the screenshots, they said they wanted the whole text chain, and the judge ordered me to, if I was going to admit the text, to go figure out a way to download all of them. So I bought a program for $20-$30 and took 3 hours. And I was very proud of myself for finally figuring out how to do it. But I was able to make a copy of it and then redact our phone numbers. So this actually showed like when they're read, when they're viewed.
What were you, all right, so up there on January 5th at 9:50 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
You're asking, what do you, read the question.
So I'm asking him, do you think it started before she hired him?
You're talking about the affair.
Yes, the affair.
And what's his response?
His response was absolutely.
So when he said absolutely on the text, it shows that he knew when they had the affair. When he was on the stand, he said pretty much he couldn't recall. And so that's when she brought up these text messages.
Started when she left the DA's office and was judge in South Fulton. And so, these are things that he had told me, but I was getting ready to file. My filing deadline was the 8th. And as we're doing this, I'm fact checking line by line, basically.
Right. So did you send him a copy of your proposed motion?
I did. And I actually admitted, so at the hearing that we had, I was able to admit the email where I sent him that. So I sent him a copy of the motion that weekend when I was I wanted him to review it. And then he had a text. He didn't write me back by email, but I submitted my email so that the court could see exactly when I sent it and when he responded. And then he responded that everything looked good. Because I asked, I said, I'm sending you this motion. I need you to look at it. And then he responded that everything looked good in it.
Right.
He actually told me at first he wanted me to make some changes because I had not included the information about how much money he had received. I had only included the information about how much Wade had received. And, I didn't know that it wasn't really highly relevant to my motion. But he was like, oh, that's going to tip them off that I'm talking to you. And he did not want anybody to know that he was talking.
So if he didn't want anybody to know he was talking, why was he talking?
He was very concerned about what.
I'm going to let you just read through this chain.
Okay.
All right. We left off up there. Absolutely, it began before it began when she was a judge in South Fulton. When was she a judge in South Fulton?
She became a judge in August of 2019. And I did an open records. I first asked.
And this is fascinating. She's an aggressive, astute lawyer talking about Ashleigh.
Actually, I first did an open records and they said no. So then I subpoenaed the records for the judicial conference, the municipal court conference.
So she was a municipal court judge.
They were both municipal court judges. So I got the
Who's both? You mean Wade was the judge at the time also?
Wade was a judge. He was actually a speaker on the panel. It was October 2019. So I found online an old agenda where he was speaking, and Terrence Bradley had told me that they met at a conference where Wade was speaking and Willis had gone. So I knew that. So and it was in person. So I could narrow it down because of COVID. I figured out when COVID happened and when, all the conferences went virtual, narrowed down my timeline. So I searched for this specific time period, which is when Bradley had told me the relationship started.
So Willis met Nathan at this conference that he was one of the speakers. So if you go to what if Willis didn't make it to that conference, where would she be at now?
And when was that conference?
It was October 2019.
Right.
So I found the agenda for that. So then I reached out to the municipal court judges CLE group and said, here's an open records request. I would like a list of attendees because I wanted to verify Miss Willis went there because I was trying to fact check. And they said no. So I subpoenaed them and they gave it to me. I also subpoenaed.
Was she in attendance?
She was.
Where was that conference?
It was at Lake Lanier.
Okay.
I also did an open records request to the city of South Fulton because I know that they have to like sign off if your judge is going to go to a conference. So I did an open records request to them to make sure that they had actually sent her to that. So I verified from 2 different sources that she attended that conference, and that matched what Mr. Bradley had told me.
All right. So
Wow.
is that a part-time job, a municipal court job, Judge?
Yes,
Okay.
it is.
So Wade could continue practicing law and do that on the side.
Well, so she was a full-time, but Wade is a part-time, and Wade only did maybe once or twice a month at most.
Okay.
Because he was in the city of Marietta. I mean, he was just he was a fill-in judge for that. That wasn't his.
Okay. So you
primary
narrowed it down to that's when the relationship began. Scroll through here for us, and I can't read that green right.
It's
What's
okay.
the next? If you don't mind, just sort of
No,
read
of
us
course.
through.
It says, is this accurate? And this was again on
So when
January.
you're saying, is this accurate? You're going over this brief and saying, I'm about to swear this in court. Will you verify it's accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
So at that time I was going through the actual statement because I was trying to figure out how to say it, and so I said, upon information and belief, Willis and Wade met while both were serving as magistrate judges and began a romantic relationship at that time. And he corrected me and said, no, it was municipal court.
You had said magistrate court, and he said no.
Right.
Okay.
And I slipped up. I should have said municipal court. I knew that.
So you say thank you. What was his response after that? No, this is 12-something p.m. on January 5th as you're getting your pleading ready.
He said, you can't put where they met. Not many people know that. I might be one of only, not even Chris Campbell.
Chris Campbell was their other law partner.
Yes.
Okay.
And I did not disclose Mr. Bradley in my initial filing. I didn't until the state forced me to.
Why was he afraid to be disclosed? Just because of his relationship with Wade, or?
So he really didn't want to be put in this, that he knew about the relationship. Wow.
Was he afraid of these people, or just didn't want to
Multiple
betray them, or what?
multiple reasons. I mean, it's the district attorney in Fulton County. I didn't really want to go, file something against her. It's not exactly a fun position to be in. Also, I mean, they have a lot of mutual friends. I'm sure it wasn't a fun position to be in to be outing a friend of yours, but the attacks, I mean, it's a small legal community,
And if Terrence is outing him and it's a small legal community, didn't he think somebody would know and it would come back and hurt him?
Were you able to get this into court? Because Bradley, I saw some of his testimony, all of a sudden can't remember anything about anything now. Were you able to use this to impeach him and show that he did know precisely what happened and when?
Yes, and he changed his testimony somewhat. At first, when he first testified, that he had never discussed this with me. And
Then you showed his text message where y'all discussed it.
well, at that point, I that caught me off guard. So, I didn't expect that. So then I pulled my text messages, and I'd had some screenshots of them just in case. And I told his lawyer, do you want to look at my text messages? And so then he later came back and testified that yes, he had.
So that's interesting because he put all these text messages out there when she had him in front, sitting on the stand. Who was more surprised? Was it Terrence because she was asking him questions, or was it Ashleigh because he wasn't answering the questions? Which one backstabbed each other more?
Had told you that.
Yes,
Okay. And did Wade testify at any of these hearings?
he did.
Did he acknowledge the relationship or not
He acknowledged the relationship. Yes.
before he was hired?
No, he did not. So before I filed the motion, nobody acknowledged any relationship. So I filed the motion on January 8th, and then on Martin Luther
Yeah,
King.
walk us through that. What
Mhm.
were the grounds why is it you feel like Fonnie Willis should be disqualified from continuing this prosecution?
And listen to this and let me know if this is the same reason that you might feel she should be disqualified or shouldn't.
Yeah, and so and these are things that I alleged in my initial motion that was filed on January 8th. I outlined this. My client in particular was not part of the special purpose grand jury. They did not recommend him to be indicted. He was not a subject. He wasn't part of that. So he was added on.
That's interesting because I remember hearing that the special grand jury had recommended prosecuting like 40-something people.
They had.
He
yes.
was not even in that list of 40.
He was not.
And they didn't take or they, as in Fonnie Willis, did not take the advice of her own special grand jury as to more than half the people they wanted prosecuted.
Subsequently, there's been a book that was published that called "Find Me the Votes," that authors had exclusive access to her, and so all of her theories in how to indict people and who to indict was explored in that book. So from that, I was able to learn that she cut a lot of people. And I mean, I have
Was that because they cut deals with them, immunity deals, or
some of them were that. Some of them I just don't think she wanted to bother with.
Then she added to the list, though, people that were not even recommended, or
My
at least your client.
My client, yes,
Okay.
she added him, so he was one of the ones. So there were some people, and it's publicly available in that book, like Senator Graham, Loeffler, those Purdue, those people.
They recommended prosecuting them.
Right. She had considered prosecuting them and taking them off the list. So there were a lot of people that had been on the consideration and then had been removed. And my client had not been considered, and then he was added. So
And what would happen again if Roman, I think his name is Michael Roman, what would have happened? Yep. If he hadn't been included on that list, would we be where we're at now?
I was trying to figure out, why would you want to expand it? There's different ways you can go about prosecution.
Did you figure out why they add your client to the list?
No, but my allegation and my motion is that, the bigger the case is, the more money that's made. And that made sense to me. So for me to file the motion to disqualify, obviously we had to have some type of a basis, besides all of the violations. And so expanding the litigation, because of how large it is, the judge has said we're probably going to have 3 trials, and each of them is going to take several months. Where if you just imagine, just follow me down the path, if you only indicted one person and it was narrow, you could try it in a month. If you indict 19 people and, 3 different essentially alleged criminal schemes, like I divided it up earlier, that you now have 3 years of trial. You've now gone from a month of trial to 3 years of trial.
So with all these people being charged, you think about this. This trial could be going on for another year or so. But if you disqualify, then you've got 14 people, 19 people who will get off, and you save a lot of money.
That's a lot more money. And so that, to me, was a financial motive, particularly since my client was not recommended by the special purpose grand jury to be indicted.
And you had the data to show that she was financially benefiting from the continued prosecution.
Yes. And so to answer your question, you were saying, walk me through it. So January 8th, I have a deadline to file this. So I'm verifying, and that's what you can see in the text. You can see heavy text with Mr. Bradley right around then to verify everything. I file it. And at that point, the world is shocked. I mean, shocked, because nobody had any idea. This had been hidden. This was even hidden from her father, who she had testified she talks to 10 times a day. So very few people knew about this relationship. And so they very much wanted to know who knew about it. Mr. Bradley, that next weekend, he gets some calls he gets a call, trying to fish to see if he's the leak, is what it was couched as. He gets a call from a gentleman named Gabe Banks, who ultimately represented Chris Campbell he filed a motion to quash against Chris Campbell, who's the law partner.
Gabe Banks' wife works for the DA's office?
Yes, he does. She does.
Works for Fonnie Willis.
Yes. And I've not gotten it. I've not opened records yet, but I have been told that Mr. Banks also has one of these special counsel contracts.
There are so many people connected with this story. It's amazing.
Again, I have not opened records. That's not part of my case. But so he calls Mr. Bradley, and Mr. Bradley calls me and another friend of ours. Her name's Cindy Yeager. She's a district attorney in Cobb County. And, he was upset. I talked to him. It was, I believe, a Saturday night, and I could tell he was upset by his text. I left my kids and went and talked to him because I was worried about him. And, he took it as what he described to me as the first shot against the bow.
So she went and met with Terrence because she was worried about him. But yet she has him on the stand. And she is getting all the information that he supposedly thought he talked to her as a friend. But she's an attorney, and it was business.
that they were trying to figure out if it was him, and they were trying to silence him. And
Trying
Gabe
to
didn't
silence him.
Mhm. And he said Gabe didn't say anything that threatened him. He just out of the blue called him, and he hadn't talked to him in quite some time. So it was out of the norm for him to call. So Mr. Banks called and told him that was asking if he was the leak, meaning if he was my source. And Mr. Banks said that it was because he had seen a news article, and Mr. Bradley knew that wasn't the case. So he said, send me the news article. So he sent him some article that did not say he was the leak, and that put an end to it. But then the next day, Mr. Wade called Mr. Bradley's best friend and said he didn't call Mr. Bradley directly, but told his friend to call Mr. Bradley and remind him of his privilege.
So Mr. Wade called Mr. Bradley's best friend. And supposedly Mr. Wade and Mr. Bradley hadn't talked for a couple of years, but Mr. Wade called Mr. Bradley's best friend and said, hey, please call your friend and let him know about the privilege that we have. Meaning you can't talk about anything involving me and you and the case with me and you.
It's an attorney-client privilege.
Yes.
Who's the best friend? Can you tell me?
I'm not, he told me his name, and I'm not positive. I think I know who it is, but I'm not positive.
All right. So Wade calls Bradley's best friend, says, you better call Bradley, remind him he's got attorney-client privilege with me, and he better not spill the beans.
I do know the best friend works at a law firm called Beasley Allen. He told me that. He said his best friend's name, and then he said he works at Beasley Allen. And he was pretty upset about it. And it was the same day of Miss Yeager's birthday. So he didn't want to call Cindy, but he was upset. So he called me, and we talked about it. And we were both pretty upset about it because it seemed, why.
Tampering with witnesses.
It just seemed like tampering, and it's just, it's just an uncomfortable position to be in, and all of us were kind of worried how the state would react to all of this. But at that point, it's
Did
still.
he interpret that as Miss Willis trying to intimidate him from revealing this affair?
Or Mr. Wade.
That's a good question.
Okay.
He took it as intimidation, yes.
Right.
Because what he called it as is the second shot across the bow. Those were his words. So he said first shot across the bow was Gabe Banks, second shot across the bow was Nathan Wade calling.
Okay.
So that's how he interpreted it. But at that point, I had not disclosed him as the witness, as the primary source. So nobody knew that. And I was trying to protect him as much as possible, just because I knew he didn't want these calls. It's not something that you want.
But he opened up on the stand with you interrogating him. But you were looking out for his best interest?
So they filed some motions to quash, and I had to
Quash
all of the subpoenas, pretty much every subpoena that I had issued.
So after you filed this motion to disqualify, I guess a hearing was scheduled,
Yes.
and
Yes.
then you started issuing subpoenas to line up your evidence.
Yes. So
That's when this witness tampering occurred?
Yes.
After that, to try to intimidate your witnesses from coming to court?
yes. So, and let me walk through the timeline. So I filed this on the 8th. The next thing that happened was Miss Willis testified. I say testified. She spoke at a church on Martin Luther King Sunday, and was making some statements about why did they single out Mr. Wade. Didn't say anything about that we singled him out because he's the only one she's having an affair with. Did not agree to that. Instead said that it was racially motivated.
And the other two special prosecutors were white.
Yes.
But they were making significantly less money.
Right. And she even said, to the church, she even said that I'm paying them the same rate.
Yes, which she did. And I read that on a previous show, that everybody was making the same amount of money. But that's not true.
Which is not true. Mr. Floyd's contract is for $150 an hour. It's never been $250 an hour. So that, one of my kids was listening to it and, said, come listen to this. And I listened to it and I was like, wait, that's not true. So that was one thing that she said that wasn't true. Also that it was racially motivated. She didn't say anything about, they're singling him out because he's the one I went on all these vacations with and he's the one I'm romantically involved in. Instead, she said that we were singling him out because of race.
Right. And did she want the people in the church to know that she was technically, Mr. Wade is still married, was having an affair with him when she was in church?
And then she said that they were all paid the same, which is not true. So I thought at that point, okay, they're not going to admit that they have this relationship. And so I'm texting with Mr. Bradley, oh my gosh, are they going to lie about this? Like, it's on their credit cards. Like, I don't know what's going to happen here. And so then In the divorce proceedings, Miss Willis had been subpoenaed to testify, and she actually invoked her executive privilege
Yeah, I
as the
remember
DA.
that. She wouldn't testify.
She would not testify. So
Then they settled it.
Right. And then they settled it because because the judge said he was going to have to testify. So they settled it, and he did not have to testify. So at that point, the judge had given us a hearing date, so I was able to issue subpoenas. So my subpoenas started going, and I filed the returns of the subpoenas, and all of a sudden the motions to quash started coming in. Right around that time, the state filed their response where they admitted to this relationship, but they put limits on it. So their response that they filed, I believe it was February 2nd, I believe. February 2nd. So on February 2nd, they filed their opposition to our motion. They admit that there was a romantic relationship, but they claim that it started after he was hired, and that all of the gifts and travel was roughly divided. They submit an affidavit from Mr. Wade, and they submitted a receipt from a credit card where she had paid for one plane ticket. So, it was a couple $100s on hers and then thousands of dollars on his. So then my subpoenas were filed, and every single one of them had a motion to quash. And they kept saying, I don't have a good faith basis. I don't have a good faith basis. Kept very harshly saying that I was making this up and nobody had told me this, and it was, gossip, and I was lying and I should be sanctioned. So the court held a hearing on their motions to quash, and I was forced to disclose Mr. Bradley as a witness, which I did not want to do because I was worried, because I knew they had called and all of these things.
And so that's when you had Mr. Bradley on the stand. And he basically had to give up everything that he told you in private, I guess.
But I had to disclose him as a witness. And so at that point, I was still talking with Mr. Bradley fairly regularly. But that then changed.
Okay. So you're waiting on the judge to rule on your motion to disqualify.
Yes, sir.
In summation, the grounds for that are what? That this is improper for a prosecutor to have a relationship with the special prosecutor?
Yeah.
So is it improper? I mean, it's like any job. They don't want you dating. So if it's any job, what are the qualifications of not dating? What are the qualifications for dating in this case?
Yes, it is a conflict of interest.
Okay. And that's because the financial benefits, or just because?
Mainly the financial benefits. There's a couple different aspects to it. We've also alleged some other misconduct because the prosecutors aren't allowed to publicly condemn an accused prior to trial. And she made a speech at a church and said this was racially motivated, talked extensively about the clients being guilty. She testified at our hearing that our clients were guilty, that my client was, guilty of trying to, I don't even remember, subvert democracy or something. But she's made a number of public statements condemning their guilt, which is not allowed.
That's inappropriate conduct for a prosecutor.
Very much so. And there's case law on that. There's bar rules on that. So there were a lot of public speeches that were made along the way. And, you can kind of follow them through this media monitoring company. But so she makes these, and then she got disqualified from prosecuting another person she wanted to prosecute.
For making public statements?
It was for a fundraising. She had thrown a fundraiser for his opponent, his political opponent.
Right.
So when that happened, you sort of see her press stuff dwindle a little bit. So she stopped making as many public comments. But then when this motion came about, she made the church speech, as I'd call it, where she's, calls me and, my client racist, and says, it condemns their guilt. And then she also gave interviews to this book. I don't know. The timing was just nuts. But the book came out right around the time that all this was happening, and it's called Find Me the Votes. And
that came out in 2024, you're saying?
It came out a month ago, if even. And she literally let the authors of this book in when she was deciding how to prosecute this case, who to indict, who not to indict. I mean, their whole thing is that they had unfettered, behind the scenes access to her thought process and stuff. So, and she's talking about all of this, that they're guilty. But the big thing for the forensic misconduct is she's in the church speech. She's saying, and she says this in the book too, that God has told her to prosecute them. So the theme between these two things is that God told her to do this, and that she is doing the will of God by prosecuting our clients. And that is,
That's unethical.
in my opinion.
All right. So I'm trying to recollect what I remember reading in basically the Atlanta newspapers about all this, because this was new to the state Senate as well, because all of this began on January 8th, which is that the day we started, 8th or 10th or something.
It did. And
it was the day session began, and all of a sudden these bombshell allegations come out. And I think that was the motivation for our Senate resolution forming this investigative committee to say, let's find out if this is true.
So this Senate committee is out there, these guys who you see, to find out if this story is true. Well, presently they're going through a trial. Sometimes politicians, it seems like they just try to find things to do. Let the political or the legal system do what it needs to do. We really don't need a Senate hearing to determine who's guilty or innocent. But man, okay, as you see, there she goes, Miss Merchant, sitting in front of all these people right here. And she's giving one thing, more information than what we had before, which is good. So you're watching, keeping it simple with yours truly, Anthony Parker. And we're trying to go through some stuff with this guy coming up, Senator Jones. You have to hear it. What he has to say.
So amusement sales, which deals with contingency fee.
Right.
And so in Whitworth, and I have the case if you want to go through it.
So it's where that was a forfeiture case. I think that was like game slots.
That's correct.
Yes.
And
And jail time. And then in my case, for example, so Mr. Wade offered my client misdemeanor probation, and that did not happen. So obviously there's an interest in him being convicted of something.
We want to see a conviction. We actually want to see it go to the end. Don't plea him out, but they only get money if they're the victor. He's receiving his funds.
So I don't think anybody called based on that, but they did advertise to them saying, call us to represent you.
And then they came with the third, which says there has to be a personal stake.
so this guy right here, Senator Jones, he is an interesting person, kind of combative as he's talking to her. And but he says some good points at some times. But then again, is he trying to make a name for himself?
In the defendant's conviction.
Right.
So is that what you're relying on there, that there's a personal stake in his conviction?
No, in the prosecution also.
You're
So,
talking
and in
about
that
me.
case, that's physical present only. And I don't remember the specific facts of that case, but it's not just a conviction. And obviously the state wants it to be just a conviction. And we argued this extensively over 3 hours, I think, in front of the court. But it's also a personal stake in the prosecution. And that was an amusement, prosecution. In that case, that was a contingency fee case. So
That's
that was
correct.
Completely different. Yeah.
And so in amusement, it was a contingency fee case. So they had a personal stake actually really in the conviction, because they only received the contingency fee when the conviction happened.
Right.
So what you're really saying is that they had a personal stake in just bringing the case, because he can't have there's no personal stake in the conviction similar to amusement, correct?
Well, so amusement's a little bit different because there is no conviction in a forfeiture.
Correct. But they're going to get money if they win.
Right. But there's no conviction.
But they're going to get money if they win. That's the key.
They get money if they keep the forfeiture. So it's where that was a forfeiture case. I think that was like game slots.
That's correct.
Yes.
But they get money if they win.
Right.
And they're talking about a previous case, trying to compare this game slot with the Fannie Willis case.
Right. But
That's the only way to get money.
Yes.
They don't get money for bringing it.
So I just wanted to make sure it was clear
Right.
that was not conviction, because you can't have a conviction.
But they only get money if they're the victor.
in
He's receiving
amusement.
his funds. Mr. Wade is receiving his funds because he's billing because the case is going on, correct?
Oh, yes.
Not because he wins a case.
No, he can lose the case and still
Absolutely.
make a ton of money off of it.
So what you're saying is the actual conflict is just bringing it.
No, the actual conflict is, oh God, that's a long answer. The actual conflict is lying on your disclosures about how much money.
I'm talking as far as this issue is concerned right here. When you use Whitworth, you use amusement sales, and they say that there has to be an actual conflict. And amusement sales, and let's go back to Whitworth if we can,
Yeah.
because in Whitworth, the person was actually told, the prosecutor was actually told by another prosecutor that they want the case to actually resolve in a conviction. Because what had happened was the defense attorney came to the prosecutor and said, we would like to plead.
Mm-hmm.
And the prosecutor basically said, no. He went and got advice from somebody, and that prosecutor said, we would like this case to resolve in a conviction.
Right.
And so the question, and that then was held not to be a conflict. They said that still is not an actual conflict, even though someone told that prosecutor, we want to see a conviction. We actually want to see it go to the end. Don't plea him out. And the court said, no, that's not an actual conflict, because what you have to show is there's an actual unfairness to the defendant in the trial.
Right.
Can you point to any unfairness in the trial that's taking place?
It's not in the trial. So it's not limited just to the trial. But to answer the first part of your question, when you were asking about the conviction of personal mistake, Ms. Willis has made numerous public statements about her interest in a conviction. There's some emails that had been admitted as part of it, as part of some of the exhibits in the case. There's a lot of pleadings, so I don't know which one exactly, but talking about her desire for there to be a conviction and jail time. And then in my case, for example, so Mr. Wade offered my client misdemeanor probation. So we were the first people to get an offer.
So listen to this. Okay. Probation was offered in this case.
And we said, no, we wanted a dismissal because he was not guilty. And
this is dealing with Mr. Roman.
Did not happen. So obviously there's an interest in him being convicted of something, because when the plea offer was for him to pay a $5,000 fine and have a misdemeanor.
So in reality, because you said that he wanted to extend the case out, he was actually trying to end your client's case
With a $5,000.
but it was going to end.
It
It would be no more billing on that case, because earlier you said that you believe, which was total speculation, that they created this case against your client to do more billing. And what you're just telling me now is that he was willing to stop his billing because he offered your client a misdemeanor and you rejected it.
So she turned down, the misdemeanor offer for Mr. Roman, and he could have ended this. But she rejected it. That's what this guy is saying.
You're the one who's continuing the billing.
Oh, I don't bill by the hour.
No, you're the one that's continuing to make him bill. He was willing to cut that off. You said, I believe that they created this case against my client so they can continue to bill. He basically went out and said, I'm tired of billing. I'm going to offer a misdemeanor.
Okay,
And you said no.
Take a couple notes because you had a couple questions in there. I want to make sure I answer all of them. So the billing, so as far as the billing and the offer. So what I was trying to explain, and I'm glad you gave me this opportunity to sort of go into it in a little more detail. I tried to explain that there are really three classifications is how I broke the indictment down. There's the folks that are involved at the federal level. You see those people having, they were in DC. Then you see the electors. Then you see coffee. These cases could have been handled.
Ms. Merchant, we can't even hear you.
Oh, I'm so
here.
sorry.
Just pull
I
it
didn't-
up right
sorry.
to you. Pull it to the edge of the desk if you have to, so everybody
Okay.
can hear.
Sorry. Okay. So how I was trying to explain it is I separate this down into three different types of cases. And it could have been handled that way. Coffee County could have been prosecuted in Coffee County if it had been chosen to do that. The stuff with the federal could have been handled in federal court if they had chosen to do that. Then the electors would have been the only remaining case that could have been prosecuted in Fulton County. Instead of choosing to do that, and it's not just my client in particular, but that group in the middle, by putting them all three together, it expands the litigation. How it expands it is a couple different ways. It expands it because when you charge a RICO case, you can bring in evidence of everything. So essentially, instead of having a case, a quick case, a case where there's evidence against Michael Roman, only Michael Roman, we litigate that. They expanded it to include these three different classifications. What does that do? That means the trial is going to be a year. They can plea people out. They can plea Michael Roman out. They can plea this person out. They can plea people out, but they're always going to have that large enterprise. And it actually does, even if they pled my client out, the offer was for him to testify. So, for him to testify, even though he would not be on trial, his acts would still allegedly be on trial, which still expands the litigation because he's not gone. The deal's not, you can plea out and you're gone. Bye. We're not taking up time with you. It still expands it. So my whole point earlier was that this expands the litigation, because imagine if we just had, like you see in other cases, one defendant. You can limit the information to just that crime and that case, or you could have 3 separate indictments. But what we've done here is we've put them all together. You've made it so that it's necessary to try them, to have 3 trials, because there's no courtroom that can fit all of those people. So that expands the litigation.
That's a lot of people.
So in the case that you cited,
Mhm.
physical or not,
Which one? Whitworth?
Whitworth, it says specifically that when the prosecutor goes up, Morgan, who is the person who's not supposed to, who's talking to him, who's the prosecutor.
Okay, we're gonna go
Just
out
in the
there,
actual
right?
grand jury.
Okay.
Yeah.
So grand jury.
Yes.
Okay. So we had a special grand jury and then you had a grand jury.
Racketeering case. You would not imagine probation and a $5,000 fine. The other 2 people who pled are both lawyers at the end of their career, and
We're talking about
a team of 10 lawyers. So
now it's a team of 10 lawyers.
who knows what part he's doing, but
Long-term contracts not going to last for a person's career. So I understand the back and forth when persons were saying, well, they could have used this money for that, but that money was delegated for him on the short-term project, so to speak. So it's not anything that a person would come in long-term and actually necessarily do. But at the same time, that would be up to the district attorney to make that decision, how she's doing that. I just make the point that so far, from a district attorney standpoint, I would say that they probably believe that so far the case is successful. And we can argue about what's qualified and what's not, but certainly I think that they would argue at this point the case has gone from a successful pattern for somebody that's been denigrated and said it's totally unqualified.
So he's pretty much explaining about Nathan, because some people said he doesn't have the experience, but he's there, he's involved. So he's saying, well, you can't put anybody down because they don't have experience. Look what Nathan's done.
I did want to go into these trips. How much
thought-
was
wait,
the money? Go ahead. Thank you.
was that a question? Because I'd like to respond if it is.
Yes.
Okay. I took notes because there were a couple different questions in there. So the first one, you said about how much money. So Ms. Willis had stated that it would be between $3 or $4 million to actually pay Mr. Wade completely to prosecute this case. So you'd be able to hire a number of prosecutors. Some of them do come and go, but most of the prosecutors we've seen on this case have been there since the beginning. So, unfortunately, these cases take time, so people may leave. You also asked me about that this money was delegated for this, and I just wanted to make sure that my testimony was accurate. This money was never delegated for this. The county did not ever delegate this. The county was not involved in that at all. Ms. Willis is the one that decided, and there's no budget. There's no transparency at all on this.
She does the contract with him, and I believe you showed those contracts. So in that sense, is delegated to him because that contract can end at any time. She could say, hey, the contract based, because he works at her pleasure.
Oh, yes.
So that contract can actually end at any time. That
Yes.
would be the point.
Yes.
On the trips, how much total were the trips?
Okay,
About
we don't really care
$20,000.
about your part.
At the beginning of the Royal Bahamans, I didn't include that. I didn't want to do the math. And
Codes. I'm talking about as far as like what the case law says, which is
oh, yeah.
what the judge is actually going to. If they're not hiding that or against the Fulton County ordinances,
They were hiding it, though.
do you believe that there's a conflict? If they brought it out and said, hey, we're dating, is it a conflict in your mind?
They only brought it out once I alleged it, and they called me a liar multiple times.
What I'm saying is that they brought it out, would it be a conflict in your mind?
If
Is
they
it a conflict?
here in a
And what would be the
Oh.
conflict?
so in a perfect world, what you're asking is if Miss Willis had gone to the Board of County Commissioners and said, I'm having an affair with this man, but he is brilliant and he would be an amazing prosecutor on this election interference case. Can I have an appropriations of $3 million and I will get it done? And she had said, and I'm going to go on vacations with him and we're going to date and we're actually going to go home to the safe house that Fulton County's paying for. And he's going to be here for 4 hours at night. If she had said all that and they had given what they gave in Exhibit J.
There you go, a summary. Okay. If Fanny had went in front of the people and said what she had said, what would the county have said? Oh, sure, you've been truthful. We're gonna let you bring him along on the case. Or what's Exhibit J?
Knowing that, Exhibit J, we wouldn't be here.
So they wouldn't have had a chance in heck as far as being the investigators on this case. And we wouldn't be here today.
So then your client actually has no conflict because that would still exist. Your client has no hard conflict then. There's no actual conflict. It doesn't matter if you disclose a conflict. If you disclose a conflict, it still exists. And that's exactly what they said in one of the cases that you cited. If a person says, I got a conflict, but I'm still going to testify against you. I know I represented you and I have a conflict and I'm going to go testify against you. Conflict is now over. Absolutely not. If you have an actual conflict where your client is harmed, just because they disclose it doesn't end that conflict.
No.
So what you're describing is not a conflict at all.
Wow. So think about that and let me know. Is it a conflict or is it not a conflict?
You're just saying, I caught somebody, so therefore I'm going to create something and call it a conflict. You cannot waive a conflict like that.
But then if you have money, you can't find any money trails. We could go up and down this case and things maybe Fanny and Nathan have done. Yeah, they have a relationship, but did they sign affidavit saying this is when it began by law? When you sign things and it's the law, then you have to pay the consequences. And is there consequences that they should be paid, or is it something, okay, you know what? It's really not a conflict of interest. But if it has the ability to smell like a conflict of interest, should they be off the case?
You just could. If your client is, you could not do that for your own client. If your client is actually suffering harm, as far as how the prosecution is taking place, because that's what a conflict is. Just because she says, oh, I'm doing these things, you're not going to go to your client and say, you actually have actual harm, but she said it, so we're going to still go forward. That makes absolutely no sense.
I'm sorry, I don't understand your question to me. I don't know what
you
you're
don't have
me.
a conflict if you're saying if she disclosed it, it would go away. Then there is no conflict.
No. I did not say that. I said we would not be here if that had happened.
So he's thinking that if Fanny said everything that happened, it wouldn't be a conflict. Ashleigh saying, even if she said it, it still wouldn't go away.
Right, because you wouldn't claim there's a conflict.
No, because we wouldn't be here because it violates so many of the Fulton County statutes and ordinances and the state statutes that we wouldn't be here because it wouldn't have been approved.
But if she disclosed it, not the way you said it,
if
it was disclosed, it's disclosed now. What is the conflict?
The undisputed facts, the facts that we all, your side and my side.
How is your client harmed? That's my question.
Hold on. I'm trying to answer your first question now. So if all the undisputed facts, if those had been in front of the Board of County Commissioners, we wouldn't be here because there would not have been a contract because it's in contravention of law. So we would not be here. I would not be bringing a motion because who knows if my client would have been indicted. Now, I wish we could go back in time and undo that and see, but we can't.
Yeah, because you kind of know if you're Fanny and you tell everybody before you get this contract, okay, I'm gonna have this man who I'm romantically involved with me, would you have really pushed that conflict? And it would go away.
And so Mr. Wade was in the grand jury. He should not have been there. He should not have been appointed. Had the Board of County Commissioners known all of the facts of the case, he would never have been appointed to this case. So we can't now speculate as to what could have happened.
What case law do you point to prove that?
Oh, the statutes. It's
not a statute, not Fulton County statute. I'm asking the Georgia Court of Appeals, Georgia Supreme Court. Is there any case that says that? And there's not.
No, and it's really not surprising, honestly, because can you imagine this happening? I mean, honestly, in December, would you have imagined this happening? I think most people wouldn't.
All sorts of conflicts are taken up by the Court of Appeals.
I can tell you, I have found some cases in other jurisdictions, but I have never found a case in Georgia where, and mind you, this only happens in Fulton County. So we're talking about Fulton County cases where there would be a special prosecutor appointed because it's the only place that this happens.
So that part is very interesting because we have to see what's going to happen for this Fanny and Trump case. So Ashleigh Merchant. So she's originally from Clearwater, Florida. She was raised with a strong sense of individual freedom. In college, she proudly served as a student senator, and she was a chairwoman of the Senate's Rules and Ethics Committee. She earned her bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Florida. During law school, she participated in mock court and she argued before the New York Supreme Court. While in law school, she clerked for a criminal defense attorney. She's a natural human rights advocate and a firm believer in defending the rights of the criminally accused. Wow. Make sure you tell parents that. So this was the Ashleigh Merchant testimony and the response. Hope you enjoyed it. Tell your friends you're watching Keeping It Honest with yours truly, Anthony Parker. You have any questions or comments? You can email yours truly as parkerman2011@gmail.com. Parkerman2011@gmail.com. You can leave me a voicemail 216-702-3718, 216-702-3718. Let me know. We're going to find out soon what's going to be happening with this Fannie Lewis versus Trump case, but I wanted you to know a little background on Ashleigh Merchant. Her husband is also in this case too. Did she look good with the Senate hearing? Did this make up for her with the trial? Did she backstab Terrence? Did Terrence backstab Nate? Is it karma? Who's going to get the most out of this? Who's going to get the worst out of this? You be the judge. Keep your head up. Never look down. Always believe in yourself. And therein will lie your answer. I'm Anthony Parker Alexander. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and share. We'll talk again. And of course, keep it simple, keep it real, and keep it honest. God bless.